So of course, we've discussed how you're optimizing for that those first most relevant actions in that initial session. You're tracking, let's say, the leading and also looking more to the lagging indicators. And you're also designing your product to meet users where they are, whether that's building engagement on and off the screen. But what I want to share is actually 3 super simple, easy to remember steps when you're trying to think about, okay, there's a whole host of biases, principles, techniques that you can leverage from behavioral science. But I would really encourage you to think in these sort of 3 steps, because these all align with existing behavior change frameworks as well. And for me, at least, super easy to remember. So if we look at that kind of simplify point, it goes back to this idea that, in general, humans we can be lazy. We don't want to be, we don't want the cognitive overload of having too many decisions to make. Whatever you can do where necessary to simplify, and also consider whatever that core action that you're trying to drive in your users or your customers, how can you understand what's the best way to even track whether those users have the capability to do it? Also, is the core action itself even clear to the user? Is it kind of hidden amongst, a whole list of other sort of UI elements, and it's not necessarily, salient to the user? And we talked about this idea of like unnecessary sort of product friction before, and of course discussed this idea of like sometimes too many choices. It's actually better to have less choices, more meaningful choices, to make a decision more likely to actually happen. And then when we think about what we mean by trigger, what I'm talking about here is how you can ensure that there's reminders, prompts, any form of salient reminder that your brand or your service actually exists, and ideally that they are prompting people to act in a highly relevant moment. So you might be thinking, are there, obviously one obvious one would be like setting up notification reminders for a digital product, signing up for emails so that you can kind of send these sort of external triggers to say to the user, hey, we still exist, you can use our product or use our service. And then I still think it's quite underrated to think about these physical reminders as well. So it's all about how you can get seen by these users or potential users as many times as possible to even remind them that you exist, essentially. And then when we think about what motivation, I've deliberately put this as the last step, because what we've seen in general is, trying to boost people's motivation, trying to get them to do something, and trying to persuade them is actually really, really hard. And that's why it's better to focus on those those users with really high intentions to use your service, and really nail what you're doing with them before trying to kind of convince people who are maybe a little bit on the fence. And across all the different companies that I've worked with, what I have seen as a very common sort of route to success when it comes to this idea of motivation is actually pinpointing what are the actual emotional pain points that you are solving for, and are you even referencing those? Are these even, leveraged throughout your messaging and your marketing? Something else to bear in mind is, does that first time experience even offer those immediate benefits? Sometimes many products and services, they have, as we've discussed before, it can take a while to actually feel any benefits of using it. So that's when you, of course, have to bring in sort of what we call like reward substitution, and actually how can you reward people for doing small things at the beginning of their journey before they've even felt this idea of weight loss or they've quit smoking. And so a lot of what we see is around positive reinforcement. For example, really focusing on what are those moments where you can send, congratulations messages or so on. So yeah, I would really kind of encourage you to think about these 3 steps.